She was already screaming when the banker called her back. "This has to be a mistake," Eleanor snapped, knuckles white on the edge of the conference table. "My husband is a nobody. He doesn't own a damn thing." Across from her, I just folded my hands and waited. The mahogany walls, the big window over Midtown, the rows of gray-haired attorneys watching, none of that shook me. For the first time in 56 years, I wasn't the quiet man in the corner. I was the problem she couldn't fix. "George," my attorney cleared his throat. "Mrs. Caldwell, the documents are clear. As of this morning, your husband controls the debt and the company." Her phone started buzzing again, over and over, sliding across the polished wood. 17 missed calls. Banks. Creditors. The life she thought she controlled falling apart in real time. She turned on me like I'd spat on the family name. "Tom, what did you do?" I looked at her and thought about how this all started. Not in Manhattan, not in this glass tower. It started 2 hours earlier on the shoulder of the Merritt Parkway outside Greenwich, Connecticut, when my own wife told me I was finished and ordered me to get out of the car. And I did. I got out. And then the rolls pulled up behind me. I stood there on the shoulder of the Merritt Parkway, with the wind whipping my shirt against my back gravel, shifting under my shoes, and the echo of Eleanor's voice still cutting through me like a scalpel. I'd been married to her for 30 years, and somehow she'd managed to make "get out" sound like the final verdict on a life sentence. Most folks in Greenwich drive past a man standing on the shoulder without a second thought, but that morning I wasn't thinking about traffic or pride. I was thinking about how a woman who once held my hand during thunderstorms now tossed divorce papers at me like I was a bill she forgot to pay. My name is Thomas Sterling Tom to anyone who's ever known me more than 5 minutes. I was born in New Haven, raised by a father who worked the docks and a mother who worked every job except the ones she deserved. They taught me 2 things: work quietly and never assume anyone owes you kindness. Maybe that's why I slipped so easily into the background after marrying into the Caldwell family. Eleanor loved attention. Her father, Ed Caldwell, owned Caldwell Holdings, a transportation company he built from scratch. He respected hard work. He respected numbers. He respected me. But his daughter, she respected the shine of things. Over the years, I let myself become the man who handled the spreadsheet. Nobody looked at the tax forms. Nobody asked about the projections. Everyone shrugged off. And that was fine with me. I never cared for the spotlight. What mattered was that the company ran smoothly and the family stayed steady. But the steadiness had been fading for a long time. Our kids, Julia and Mark, had grown spoiled by the Caldwell money. They talked about me like I was an old utility bill that kept showing up. "Dad, you don't get business," they'd say. Or "Mom's the real brain here." Maybe I should have pushed back sooner. Maybe I should have drawn lines, but conflict never came naturally to me. What came naturally was endurance. And that endurance, quiet, overlooked, ignored, was about to become my sharpest weapon. I didn't realize how long I'd been standing on that shoulder until the smell of hot asphalt mixed with the early June humidity started to make my stomach churn. The Merritt is a beautiful road when you're driving it. Trees arching overhead, sunlight flickering through the leaves. But when you're standing there with your life in a manila envelope, it feels like the world is rushing past you at 70 miles an hour while you're stuck in place. Eleanor hadn't just handed me divorce papers. She'd flicked them at me like they were lint. She'd also tossed me a check, one of those starter checks you order when you open an account, still stiff from the packet. A small number printed in her neat handwriting, barely enough to cover a month's groceries. "For gas," she'd said. "You'll need it." That was the last thing she told me before the Escalade door slammed. For gas. As if I were some down-and-out stranger, she felt obligated to help. As if the last 3 decades had been charity. As if I hadn't kept her father's company alive through 2 recessions, a supply chain collapse, and more internal family drama than any business should withstand. I watched her SUV merge back into traffic taillights, blinking once before disappearing. I should have felt abandoned, but what I felt was sharper, cleaner. Like someone had finally wiped fog off a mirror and forced me to look at what my life had become. I tried just the week before to liquidate a small portfolio I'd built years ago, 3 gas stations in Fairfield County that I bought quietly and improved quietly. Solid, boring assets. They'd been my safety net. But when I tried to transfer the proceeds to a separate account, the bank manager called me personally to say the request had been frozen. Per your wife's legal counsel, he said, almost apologetic. Marital asset protection order. I remember holding the phone in disbelief. Eleanor had moved preemptively. That meant she'd planned this exit. She'd prepared for the blow before she threw it. And she'd assumed I would just take the hit. Maybe that's what hurt the most. Not the money, not the betrayal, but the assumption that I wouldn't fight back, that I couldn't. Our kids weren't any better. Julia had rolled her eyes when I asked her to slow down her spending. Dad, Mom says you can't manage finances. Maybe let her handle things. Mark once joked at a Christmas party that I was CFO of the checkbook. I laughed with everyone else at the time. But standing on that highway with dust on my shoes and papers in my hand, the memory twisted in my stomach. That's when I heard the low hum of a powerful engine behind me. Slow, deliberate, expensive, a Rolls-Royce Ghost. Black, quiet as a confession. The rear door opened without a word. I didn't know who sent it. I didn't know why it was there. But I knew one thing with absolute clarity. If Eleanor wanted a war on my dignity, she just made the mother of all miscalculations. Because I wasn't the man she thought she left behind on the Merritt Parkway. Not anymore. The driver didn't speak when I slid into the back seat. He just glanced at me in the mirror, a calm, steady look from a man who'd seen his share of wealthy families implode and ease the rolls back onto the parkway like he was carrying something fragile. George sent me, Mr. Sterling, he finally said. George Benton, my attorney, old friend, one of the only people Ed Caldwell trusted as much as me. I nodded, leaned back, and let the leather swallow me whole. It was the first soft thing I'd felt all morning. We didn't head toward home. We didn't head toward Manhattan. We pulled into a quiet turnout under the trees, and the driver reached into the console, handing me a small brown envelope. My name was written on it in Ed's handwriting, his real handwriting, the shaky but stubborn script he'd kept even through his illness. My throat tightened before I even opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper creased from being folded and refolded. I'd forgotten this existed. It had been years. Tom, it began, if you are reading this, it means I'm gone, and it means Eleanor has done exactly what I feared. I closed my eyes. I could almost hear his voice slow, gravelly, worn from decades of building his trucking roots. I have updated my will, and I need you to remember why. You saved this family more than once. You kept the business alive when neither of my children cared enough to learn how it worked. I trust you. You are the one who understands how this company breathes. My chest felt tight, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. She thinks she can control everything through image and intimidation, the letter continued. But you know the numbers, and the numbers don't lie. I'm leaving the majority of Caldwell Holdings to you because you're the only one capable of running it without destroying it. I stared at the signature. Ed's last years had been rough hospital rooms, confusion, long silences. But the signature wasn't from then. It was from before, when he was still clear, still sharp. This letter wasn't sentimental. It was legal dynamite. The driver waited until I folded it carefully and slid it back into the envelope. That's not the only thing Mr. Caldwell left behind, he said quietly. George will show you the rest. I didn't respond for a long time. I looked out at the trees arching overhead, sunlight flickering like a warning. All those years I thought endurance was enough, that if I worked hard and stayed steady, the people I loved would see my worth. But Ed had seen it. Eleanor had seen it too, she just resented it. And that letter changed everything. It wasn't just proof. It was permission. Permission to stop absorbing hits. Permission to finally swing back. George was waiting for me in his midtown office, top floor glass, everywhere, the kind of space that makes a man feel either powerful or exposed. For most of my life, I would have felt the latter. That morning, I felt neither. I felt ready. He didn't shake my hand. He just motioned for me to sit, then placed a thick folder on the table between us. This, he said, is what Eleanor has been hiding. Inside were copies of filings she'd made over the past 3 months. Quiet, methodical steps that only someone raised in privilege thinks she can get away with. Asset freezes, emergency marital protections, early divorce motions timed perfectly to coincide with the reading of her father's will. She planned to divorce you before the will was validated, George said, which means anything you inherited would still fall under marital property. I exhaled through my teeth. She wanted me out before she knew whether I stood to receive anything. She knew, George corrected gently. Ed told her. She just didn't know how much he trusted you. I leaned back, the letter from Ed still a weight in my pocket. All those years of quiet work, late nights, balancing ledgers, fixing cash flow crises, no one else even saw coming, and she thought she could cut me out before the ink dried. I should have expected it. Eleanor was her mother's daughter, raised on Connecticut tennis courts, private schools, charity galas. To people like her, the appearance of power mattered more than the substance of it, and she believed she'd cornered me legally and financially. But what she didn't know, what no one knew, was the truth about my hobby investments. 20 years earlier, when Caldwell Holdings was struggling, I'd put a small amount of money into a handful of obscure startups companies, built on tech patents and land rights no one understood at the time. They were long shots, ridiculous risks, the kind of things you never tell a spouse who mocks anything she doesn't understand. Most of them failed, but one didn't. One exploded. A tiny company that owned the rights to a routing algorithm now used by half the logistics companies in America. My half-forgotten investment ballooned into something enormous, quiet money, tucked away, untouched, unseen. I'd always intended it to be our safeguard, a safety net for my family. But Eleanor froze our accounts before I could move a cent. And that's when it hit me. She was playing checkers. I was sitting on a chessboard. George opened another folder. Loan, documents, debt schedules, bank agreements. You have enough liquid assets to buy the company's debt outright, he said. All of it. I blinked. Buy the debt. Every IOU Caldwell Holdings owes. He tapped his pen. And whoever owns the debt can convert it to controlling ownership. Legally, quietly. I stared at the numbers, their cold precision calming something inside me. All those years of being invisible had created the perfect cover. Eleanor thought I couldn't fight back. She just never imagined I could win. George laid everything out on the table, timelines, filings, bank contacts, debt ledgers, like we were preparing for surgery. And in a way, we were. My marriage had already been declared terminal. Now we were operating on the remnants of my life. Timing is everything, he said, pushing a legal pad toward me. If Eleanor finalizes the divorce before the will is officially executed, she'll claim half of whatever you inherit, even if Ed left the company to you outright. I rubbed a hand over my face. How long do we have? 48 hours, maybe less. 48 hours. After 30 years of being dismissed, diminished, and ignored, I had 2 days to reclaim everything I'd built. George tapped the debt folder again. If we're going to stop her, we have to go through the business, not the marriage. I nodded slowly. Move the battle to the one place she doesn't understand. He allowed himself a tight smile. Exactly. The plan in its simplest form felt almost too clean. I would buy the debt Caldwell Holdings owed. All of it. Banks love a fast payoff. They wouldn't ask questions. And once the debt was mine, I could legally convert those holdings into a controlling ownership stake. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, Eleanor told people I wasn't business-minded, that I was just a numbers guy, a background noise, a man who kept receipts. And now those same numbers were about to make me the majority owner of her family's empire. George slid a final document across the table. There's something else. Stratford and Associates, the firm handling Ed's will, reading, you bought them 3 months ago. I blinked. What? He chuckled under his breath. Your investment trust, not you, personally acquired them through a holding company. I thought you knew. I didn't. But suddenly the world made a strange kind of sense. The roles, the immediate resources, the seamless access to confidential filings. All of it had been displaced chess pieces falling into place. So the meeting is happening in your building, George finished. Under your roof, with your staff. Eleanor thinks she's walking into a reading she can manipulate. She has no idea the floor under her has already shifted. I stared out the window at Manhattan's steel glass noise life. For decades, I'd walked through this city feeling like a ghost, a man who fixed things quietly while louder people took the credit. But not today. Prepare the call notices, I said. My voice surprised me. Steady, certain. Every creditor, every bank. When I walk into that room tomorrow, I want the walls shaking with incoming calls. George capped his pen. Understood. When I left the office, the sky over Midtown was beginning to darken. The air smelled like rain. People hurried along the sidewalks, umbrellas, half-open taxis honking at nothing. I felt still, completely still. For the first time in my life, I wasn't reacting. I was directing. The next morning, Manhattan felt different, charged like a storm was about to break. I'd barely slept, not out of fear, but out of a strange, steady clarity that kept pulling me awake. I showered in silence, put on the one navy suit Eleanor never liked, and walked out of the apartment George had arranged for me. No family photos, no clutter, no memory of anyone telling me I wasn't enough. The Rolls was waiting downstairs. The driver nodded. "Morning, Mr. Sterling." We headed towards Stratford and Associates, my firm, though Eleanor believed it was still under the control of some old money Manhattan partners she could push around. She never bothered to learn the details. She thought money moved because she wanted it to. But money moves for whoever understands it. The air grew thicker as we cut through midtown traffic. Puddles from the night's rain reflected the skyscrapers, turning the streets into mirrors. Every stoplight seemed to hold a question, "Are you ready?" And every time the answer came back, the same, "Yes," more than ever. When we pulled into the underground garage, George was waiting near the elevator, adjusting his tie. "It's done," he said the moment I stepped out. "All call notices were issued at 8:01 a.m. The banks will start reacting any minute." A small tremor ran through me. Not fear, just the weight of what was coming. My wife, my children, the entire Caldwell family. All of them were about to learn the truth the hard way. We rode the elevator up smooth and silent. As the doors opened onto the top floor conference level, I saw the controlled chaos of legal assistants moving with purpose. Phones ringing, printers humming, documents being rushed into folders. All under my authority. George led me into a private office, the managing partner's suite. I closed the door and let the quiet settle. On the desk sat the last piece of the puzzle, a handwritten note from Ed Caldwell. Not the letter I'd read earlier, but a simpler one. Dated, witnessed, clear. "Tom," it read, "if she ever tries to cut you out, this confirms my wishes. Protect the company. Protect yourself." I folded it carefully. Outside the door, I could already hear raised voices, Eleanor's among them. Sharp, impatient, entitled. She didn't know I was here. She thought she'd arrive early and position herself as the center of the meeting. But she was standing on my floor. In my building. With my lawyers preparing documents that would unravel her entire plan. "Ready?" George asked quietly. I nodded. Then my phone buzzed once, twice, then nonstop. A wall of notifications, banks, creditors, all responding. It had begun. We walked toward the conference room. Each step felt heavier, truer, like I was walking into the life I'd been denied for years. Before entering, George paused and looked at me. "Remember," he said, "we don't raise our voices. We don't argue. We present facts. They collapse." I took a slow breath. "I've been quiet my whole life," I said. "Today's silence is finally on my side." And with that, we stepped through the side door, my door, and into the moment everything would break open. The room froze the moment we stepped inside. Not the main doorway, Eleanor and the kids were camped there, like royalty waiting for their subjects, but the side door, the one only partners used. The one she didn't even know existed. Her head snapped toward me so fast her earrings swung. "Tom, what, how did you?" But before she could gather her indignation, her phone lit up again. Then again. Then again. Buzz, buzz, buzz. It skittered across the table from the force of the vibrations. Mark reached for it. "Mom, it's the bank again. That's the 13th call." Julia frowned. "Why would they be?" George took his seat beside me, calm as Sunday morning. "Why don't we begin?" The senior associate, my employee, though Eleanor didn't know, had opened a Navy binder. "This is the final legally validated will of Edward Caldwell." Eleanor scoffed. "Oh, for God's sake. My father wasn't in his right mind the last 2 years. We all know that. This is a waste of time." The associate continued unfazed. "In this will, Mr. Caldwell leaves controlling ownership of Caldwell Holdings to his son-in-law, Thomas Sterling." The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was electric. A live wire snapped in half. "You're out of your mind," Eleanor shot up from her chair. "My father wouldn't give this company to an accountant who couldn't negotiate his way out of a grocery store coupon." George folded his hands. "Mrs. Caldwell, please sit." She didn't. She took a step toward me, jabbing a finger in the air. "You planted this. You put that paperwork in front of him when he was sick. It's fraud. It's criminal. You hear me, Tom? Criminal." I didn't move. 30 years of marriage had taught me that reacting was how she won. My stillness confused her, and that confusion was finally working in my favor. Another call hit her phone, then another. It began to ring outright, loud and shrill. She snatched it up. What she barked. She listened. Her face drained. No, that can't be correct. Who bought the debt? That makes no sense. Then her eyes flicked up to mine. You, she whispered. George stood. Mrs. Caldwell, before you accuse anyone of wrongdoing, please review the following document. He handed her a single page. The Sterling Trust, he said, has legally purchased all outstanding Caldwell Holdings debt and has elected to convert those financial instruments into a 51% controlling ownership stake. Julia blinked. What does that even mean? It means George said your father's company belongs to your father's chosen heir, and as of 8 o'clock this morning, the company answers to Mr. Sterling. Eleanor's jaw trembled not with grief but outrage. This is my family's legacy, she hissed. You think you can take it by hiding behind some trust? I finally spoke. No, I said softly. I didn't hide behind anything. I just stopped hiding behind you. Her voice cracked. I threw you out this morning. Yes, I said. And when you did, you triggered the divorce clause in your own prenup, the one you insisted on. It transfers non-business marital assets into separate entities during pending dissolution, which means the accounts you froze are no longer under your control. The air thickened. No one breathed. You tried to erase me, I said. All you did was clear the space I needed. Eleanor staggered back into her chair. Not beaten, but undone. Eleanor stared at me like she was seeing a stranger, someone she never bothered to learn, someone she never imagined she'd need to fear. Her lips parted, but no words came out at first. Just a faint, strangled sound, the kind a person makes when the world they built begins to crack under their feet. This isn't happening, she finally whispered. But it was, and everyone in that room knew it. Mark pushed his chair back, a face flushed. Dad, you can't do this. You're ruining Mom's life. I looked at him, not with anger, not with vengeance, but with the kind of clarity that only comes after being ignored by your own children for years. Son, your mother ruined her own life. I'm cleaning mine. You're punishing us, Julia said, her voice wavering. What did we ever do to you? That question, so painfully naive, almost made me laugh. But I didn't. You stopped seeing me, I said simply. And you learned it from her. Eleanor shot to her feet again. Don't talk to them like that. You're not the victim here, Tom. You're not. I held up a hand, and for the first time in our entire marriage, she stopped talking. I'm not the victim, I said. I'm the man who finally decided to stop letting you write the story. The senior associate cleared his throat. If I may continue. But Eleanor slammed her palm on the table. I'll take this to the board. I'll take it to court. I'll take it to the press. George smiled at her, not kindly. Mrs. Caldwell, with respect, you no longer have authority to take anything anywhere. As of this morning, you hold no controlling interest. Caldwell Holdings operates under Mr. Sterling's direction. Her breath caught. You can't humiliate me like this. I leaned back in my chair. Calm. Steady. I didn't humiliate you, Eleanor. You did that when you threw divorce papers at me like trash. You did that when you froze our accounts behind my back. You did that when you made sure our children saw me as a joke. Her chest heaved. I was trying to protect our image. Your image, I corrected, not ours. For a moment, the only sound in the conference room was the quiet hum of the HVAC system. Even the city seemed muted behind the floor-to-ceiling windows. Then Eleanor's fury reached its final desperate pitch. You'll regret this, she screamed. You hear me, Tom? You will regret every second of this. You think you've won, but you've just destroyed everything. Everything this family built. I stood. Not dramatically, not angrily. Just stood. And the room seemed to change around me as if 30 years of silence had finally condensed into something with weight. I regret one thing, I said quietly. Letting you talk to me the way you did for as long as you did. Her face crumpled, not with sadness, but with disbelief. She simply didn't have a blueprint for a world where she didn't win. I turned to George. Let's finish this. And for the first time since Ed Caldwell's death, I felt the ground solidly under my feet. They escorted Eleanor and the kids out of the conference room, gently, professionally, but firmly. No shouting, no scene, just the soft click of the door closing behind them. And with that, the war that had started on the shoulder of the Merritt Parkway finally went quiet. I stayed in the room a moment longer, letting the silence settle around me. The Manhattan skyline stretched out in front of me, gray clouds hanging low sunlight, pushing through in thin, stubborn streaks. It reminded me a little of myself, in a way I'd never admitted before. Slow to shine, but steady. George stepped beside me. You did well. I exhaled long and heavy. It doesn't feel like winning. That's because it isn't, he said plainly. It's reclaiming. Different thing entirely. We walked out into the hallway together. Staff passed us with respectful nods, some of them probably realizing for the first time that the quiet man walking beside their managing partner was now the owner of the company their firm served. But there was no pomp, no applause, and I didn't want any. Winning publicly meant nothing if I couldn't live quietly afterward. A few hours later, when everything was signed, stamped, and sealed, I stood alone inside my new office overlooking 6th Avenue. My name wasn't on the door yet, but the space already felt different, clearer, lighter, somehow less crowded by the expectations of a family that never really saw me. I sat down, opened the window just enough to feel the city breeze, and let my shoulders finally drop. The aftermath came in waves. Eleanor and the kids would receive the minimum required by lawfare humane, but nowhere near the life they'd grown used to. They'd have to work, budget, learn humility, maybe even become better people for it. And me, I walked to a small bar cart by the window, poured myself a club soda, never cared for whiskey, and raised the glass slightly like Ed was standing beside me. You were right, I murmured, about everything. I could almost hear him chuckle in that gravelly, worn-down voice. Told you she'd try something. Good thing you were always the one paying attention. As the sun slipped lower between buildings, I thought about the decades I'd spent fading into the background, thinking that kindness meant silence, that love meant endurance, that loyalty meant losing pieces of myself year by year. But standing there in that quiet office, I felt something return, a sense of self maybe, or dignity, or just the simple truth that I was still here. Still standing. Still mine. I stayed by the window until the city lights came on one building at a time, tiny squares of yellow and white blinking awake across Manhattan. People living their lives. People starting over. People ending chapters they should have walked away from years earlier. I guess I was one of them. In the days that followed, I moved into a small 2-bedroom condo in Stamford. Nothing fancy, nothing performative, just mine. I bought groceries without checking with anyone. I cooked dinner without being criticized for how I chopped onions. I took evening walks without feeling like a shadow trailing behind someone else's life. One morning, maybe a week after everything settled, I walked into a little coffee shop near the harbor. The barista, a woman around my age with silver streaks in her hair, smiled and asked what had me up so early. Starting fresh, I told her. She nodded like she understood, like she'd said those words once too. And in that small, ordinary moment, I realized something. Revenge isn't about destroying someone else. It's about reclaiming yourself. If you're listening to this and you feel unseen, unheard, or underestimated, remember my name, remember my story, and remember that quiet people aren't weak. We're patient, and patience used well can change everything. If this story meant something to you, share it with someone who needs strength today. And if you'd like to hear more stories where justice finds its way back home, you're welcome to stay. Thanks for being here with me.